Hello, everyone. You're listening to TruthCat Radio at truthcatradio.com. The current time is now 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's East Coast, USA. I myself am broadcasting from Chicago, Illinois, in the U.S. My name is Richard Kary, and this is Beyond the Matrix. Today we have Thomas Joseph Brown joining us once again. He's an independent researcher in spiritual science and metaphysics, an author, editor, and videographer. We're going to be speaking with him in just a second. I am really excited to what we could get to today. First, I would just like to mention to everyone out there that we are listener supported. We are not accepting corporate advertising, and we are not monetizing. All our archives are free. But that being said, if you can, please support our station. We have a support page on our station website, www.truthcatradio.com. And on our support page, we have PayPal accepted as an option. A lot of people like the secure ease of PayPal, and any little bit helps, folks. In the world of independent media, no donation is ever too small. And a lot of times that little extra change a few of you throw in helps just make sure we get all the bills paid and all that. So, I mean, please do what you can. And if you could, we like our pages on TruthCat Facebook page, a page for Beyond the Matrix, and TruthCat Radio Facebook page. And well, we do generally most of our promotion through Facebook. So, please, if you can, please, like and share those. And we have a TruthCats news group. A lot of people seem to like that, to share a lot of important links and information, throughout the independent media. I would like to also say hello to JP and everyone at Wolf Spirit Radio, who we're simulcast to. Thank all of you for listening as well, and thank you, JP, for adding us to your simulcast. And if anyone would like to call in, have any questions tonight for our guest or anything, the call-in number would be 714-598-3125. That number again, 714-598-3125. Please be sure to turn off your radio if you do call in. Don't say anything when in the call-in queue. And I'll just invite you to speak from your area code. But and please support the station with whatever you can. TruthCat Radio at truthcatradio.com. Now then, as I said, our guest tonight is returning once again, Thomas Joseph Brown. And Thomas is an independent researcher in spiritual science and metaphysics, an author, editor, and videographer. He's been working on core ideas which will transform the current paradigm. So we are going to be discussing paradigm transformation and all things related. Thomas, hello. Hi, can you still hear us fine?
Oh, yes, Richard. Yeah, good to have a chat with you again. Thanks for having me on. Yes.
Thank you for making the time once again. I was really impressed with our interview last time. Just for the record, I mean, yeah, I'd say you're one of my favorite guests, and we just went into so many different directions. I think that's the only issue. Or if I had a complaint about you, just so much to cover. It was hard to stay to a focused topic.
Yeah, welcome to my life. Yeah. Well, I gotta say too, because you're broadcasting from Chicago. I was born in Chicago, and I still call people cats. I go, man, it was a cool cat, and they go, where'd you get that language? I go, from Chicago. So it's good to be on Truth Cat Radio, Richard.
Excellent. All right. Well, things have a way of working out, I suppose, in the cosmos.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I hope your day's been going well so far. I know you guys are entering your winter season over in New Zealand there. Isn't that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And well, yeah, last time we as I said, we touched on so many different things, Gnosticism, artificial intelligence, cyborgs, the concepts of borderlands, thermodynamics, waves and frequency, light and color, the spectro-chrome and the therapies coming from that, counter space, ether force, and just the Etherean sciences in general. Just, I don't know, there are just a lot of places I'd love to expand upon further. But I mean, I don't know. Well, first, I'd just like to ask, where your work and most of your interest has been, at current. I mean, where have you mostly been taking things at the moment?
Okay, well, that's a few directions, but in general, I mean, we have to think. There's an old saying, we don't see things. We see things as we are, not as they are, and that's very true. One of the things I've looked at is sort of the evolution of consciousness and perspectives, through the ages. And Rudolf Steiner dealt with that a bit too in his work. The sort of transformation of consciousness. So, the way people look at everything, the universe, the sky, it's all based on their understanding. And well, where does that understanding actually have its root within our minds? I mean, I think probably most of us listen to this know that our brains really aren't the boss in that sense. They're just some sort of interface with the intelligent fields. So, what exactly is the root of everything? How do we get to the core of reality beyond sort of our genetic and mimetic imprints? The miseducation that we've suffered through the so-called schooling processes. So, yeah, I guess that's really what I've been looking at lately is how can one penetrate into what reality really is rather than what we think it is. So that's for a start.
Yes, I mean, all the subjects in school, including all the sciences, for all the universities toe the line of all the accepted, well, it's a belief system really in the sciences and it supports the corporations. Isn't that a fair way to put it?
Oh, totally. And I mean, if you go back and look at the schooling system, it was basically designed to be that way, to move the children out of the home, away from, the educational process handed down through the generations and put it into the hands of the state. And so basically what it does is it imprints a logic system. And this gets to the root of what I was talking about is where does our worldview come from? I got interested in this because I've been following the whole flat earth thing for a couple of years. People go, why do you bother? I go, well, it's actually been quite fascinating. I first looked at it because I'm interested in cosmographic realities, trying to figure things out in worldviews. But it finally dawned on me how, where the whole fundamentalist perspective comes from. And then I realized we all have this within us. And that is, we get these imprints in the middle portion of our brain, what's called the limbic cortex or the paleo-mammalian center. And that's actually the root of our worldview. And that's tied in with our emotions and what we call a dopaminergic pleasure and reward system. So when we get, we basically self-reinforce our worldviews and can't get out of them. So if we get into the neocortex, the upper brain, the logic portions, we're able to assess this. But in general, the human mind isn't strong enough just through it has the potential, but it hasn't been trained in order to allow the logic functions to override the limbic imprints and sort of reorganize them. through schooling and stuff, this happens. And that's why when you speak to academics, and you try to bring them a new idea, they go, well, has that been peer reviewed, right? Because they don't want to know about it unless somebody in their club thought it out and decided if it was thinkable within their imprint paradigm. There's no honest logic function that can penetrate outside of what they've been imprinted with. So yeah, in general, that's what I've been looking at. How do we get past that? And where has that brought us within society and science and our perspective of the universe?
It looks like we also have a caller. Is that
I
right?
just want to let you know that the caller is just would like to listen, and she's going to try to mute her keep her microphone quiet. Okay.
Oh, sure. That's fine.
But we should mention though, everybody, that if the best way to listen, of course, is by going to the main page at www.truthcatradio.com, and you will see a player button on there that you have to press the arrow to make it play. And if you have any problems whatsoever, go to the chat page, try the player over there, and if that doesn't work, try refreshing or upgrading your browser. We have a new player, and it's not working apparently with some of the older browsers, so that's the problem, is people need to update their browsers. Okay? Thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for that, Stephen. Yes, Thomas. Well, I mean, it seems, like people, I don't know, need to start doing more independent research is what it sounds like to me. I don't know if we can count on the institutions to steer away from things, right?
Right. Well, it's more than just doing the research, Richard. And of course that is essential, but it's how you do the research. And this is what I suppose I always, from that old book by Robert Anton Wilson, the old Illuminatus trilogy, they talked about people that were gullible, but in the right sort of way. And I think that leads a lot of us. But along that way, I came across the work of basically Goethe, the great German poet scientist, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And he showed a way of basically creating new organs of cognition within our intelligence, beyond what we could call the discursive. So let's get back to the root. Really, here's the nitty gritty. So let's start at the root of the modern materialistic consciousness. It's actually Galileo's fault. I mean, we sort of hail him as, I've even seen like old engravings of him as Prometheus, right? Bringing the light with his telescope and, supporting the Copernican worldview, because he could see the moons of Jupiter circling around and the phases of Venus, which, indicates that it's not circling the Earth in the old sort of Ptolemaic systems. But many people don't know Galileo was an armaments master. He was a consultant to the Venetian armory. And the first book on physics was Galileo's Ballistics on cannonball trajectories. Now, what's interesting is to make a long story short, and we can fill in along the way, but if you follow the trajectory of Galileo's cannonball through the history of the sciences, first it sort of hits John Locke with his primary and secondary qualities, where they separated out, the inertialistic properties of matter and our experience. So all of a sudden, and this of course comes out of Galileo too, where nothing which could not be weighed or measured was allowed within sciences. And this whole line of thinking developed outwards. It hit Newton, right, with his linear spectrum, which was only part of it. Goethe corrected all of that. And that's something we can further discuss, because that's really the core of what I see as the new sciences. But we follow that trajectory, right? It goes through like, William Crookes's cathode ray tubes, where he thought there was a borderland into the spirit world, but it was the lower borderland. It wasn't the creative chaos of the above that Goethe saw within his metamorphoses of plants. And we follow it through. It hit Einstein in the head, and that's why he came up with that crazy space-time mathematical aberration, because we go back to Galileo again in the old Florentine academies, and they ruled that you couldn't talk about levity. You could no longer conceive of heat rises. Well, what does that actually mean? Well, there's some things go down, some things go up. But in science, there's nothing that goes up except heat rises, right? But there's actually
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I remember from your previous interview with us, you mentioned a counterforce to gravity. You mentioned how, like, when a match burns out, you have some things, some chemicals that the heat is pushing upward as the carbon eventually would fall to Earth through gravity. So that it proves there's a counterforce to gravity at work, right?
Oh, absolutely. And gravity is certainly the dominant force. So, I mean, that's where the misunderstanding of materialistic consciousness has come in, and the misunderstanding of Newton with the linear spectrum, because green is the center green one is the dominant one rather than the magenta one, which is considered a secondary, not pure color thing. But the problem with Einstein's is because well, it all arose because they couldn't measure the rotation of the Earth with their ether drift experiments, through Michelson-Morley and some of the other ones, Oliver Lodge. But trying to calculate that stuff mathematically, it was where the problem came in, because basically, because gravity, because of this contra levitatum maxim of the Florentine academicians back 500-600 years ago, you weren't allowed to think of that once in consciousness. So while the electromagnetic forces are polarized, gravity's not. So Einstein had to put space and time into one mathematical aberrated form in order for this whole calculations to work. And that's why you can see from that perspective, this stuff's fundamentally nonsensical as far as, I mean, it might work within certain degrees. They got atom bombs and stuff. We know that you can make certain technologies. But when you come to the mathematical side of things and the interpretation and the whole thing about modern physics, where they don't discover anything, and then through experimentation, what they do is they got theoretical physicists that think it out, and then they search for it. So it's all math. But Goethe noted, he said, mathematics has a completely false reputation of yielding infallible conclusions, right? But because there's all sorts of math. But just the final trajectory, the final point then of Galileo's cannonball, it spins around in CERN, and where does it hit? The black hole. The black hole is the mathematical metaphor of Galileo's cannonball. And of course, there are no black holes. Nobody's ever seen them. They keep discovering them, in quotes. But of course, they don't really discover them. Just every new thing that they see, they attribute to black holes because they're stuck in that paradigm. It's imprinted in their paleo-mammalian limbic system, and their logic functions can't overcome it. So that's the long and short of it, Richard.
And your fascination, you mentioned with the flat Earth concept. I don't know. Could you explain how that could fit into? I mean, we're talking about gravity and trajectories of cannonballs. So I mean, I might as well throw that in there while we're at it.
Oh yeah. Well, no, I mean, flat Earth thing's been fascinating and frustrating. When it first popped around a few years ago, I mean, I'd heard about it in the past. I thought it was kind of like a Monty Python sort of like goof society. You wanted a flat Earth society thing on your wall just to show that you were an unconventional person. Now I'd be embarrassed to have one on. And it's woken people up, but in the wrong sort of way. Because in essence, our experience of the world is as a flat plane because of the perspective. There is this higher order living function we call it anthropic. In fact, there even is scientists within the Orthodox community, what they call the anthropic cosmological principle, as though the universe itself was created to support life, which is sort of anathema to the mathematical, aberrant wonder worlds of the particle physicists and stuff. But in that sense, sure, we experience the world as a flat plane, but it's not. Basically, it's quite easy. If you got two theodolites within 200 to 300 meters or yards there in the States or England, you can basically measure the curvature through the zenith angles of plumb lines. It's actually not hard at all to do. And I didn't understand all of that. So it's been a real educational process. But what you find is that the people that get totally dedicated to flat Earth, they keep repeating the same stuff over and over again. And you try to explain to them how the math works, that they're using the math wrong. And it's an amazing.
Well, Well, I mean, I had the impression you were trying to more prove a point about Newtonian physics being flawed rather than confirming anything of flat Earth. I mean, surely we have enough evidence, that we're on a sphere, right, like of the planetary body. It's just, just as all the others in our solar system. So I mean, you would lean toward that camp, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm open to anything. If it was flat, I'd say it, but it doesn't work out that way. But yeah, the whole thing too is, well, because they say that, and this is what makes me think it's a psyop, is that there's been certain people out there like Mark Sargent and stuff that have interviewing these people supposedly from the Navy sort of missile instructors and stuff, from claiming that they don't take any of the curvature or spin into account, but they actually do. You go into the manuals, they do teach it. It's in, but anyway, that's a whole other off subject. I think as far as it goes, the reason I even mentioned it earlier was just the different world views that's there. And I'm actually working on a major paper on that, which is going to be published in an online magazine called The New Earth Oracle. And so I've been working with a group called the New Earth Institute, and it's basically newearth.institute. And it's basically sort of a far-flung sort of group of people trying to put together interesting knowledge. I suggest people go and have a look at the website. So I've just been seeing that as a platform to help put some of my ideas in and helping them sort of set up the platform as well. But as far as the science, so yeah, we see the cannonball trajectory. Where do we go with that? Well, because of that, anything that doesn't fit is thrown out. So let's go back to John Locke, who I mentioned, the philosopher who was also, very interesting gentleman. I won't go into the whole history, but primary and secondary qualities. What are the primary qualities? Are weight, mass, movement, time. That's it. The properties of inertialistic matter. What are the secondary qualities? Sight, sound, smell, feeling, hearing, our experiential reality. Now, according to scientific dogma, only the primary qualities are real. The secondary qualities are mere illusions caused by the electrochemical structure that occurred in us by chance, because lightning hit a pool of jizz after the magical Big Bang. And somehow amoeba crawled out, turned into a dinosaurs, and here we are talking about it. But so the only reason that we even perceive this stuff is because just some chance. So you're not really hearing me. You just got vibrations happening in your ear, and you think you're hearing me. You're not really seeing something in front of you. You're just seeing vibrations. So what science has done is completely stripped the subjective out of everything, the experiential. But it's like, well, when you die and your life passes before your eyes, what do you take with you? What some scientists told you, or what your experience is? What's the impression of your psychocosmic being? So, because my interest isn't purely in the scientific or the material. I'm interested in life. Look at all the things of life that have been pushed out of science. Wilhelm Reich's work with the orgone. What a brilliant line of research, which is, if you go to like skeptic sites, they just totally ridicule the guy without ever checking up or actually learning that, the orgone's everywhere. It drives us. It's a living atmospheric energy, and it can be measured. It can be experienced. So, yeah, I guess that's when I talk about the paradigm, metamorphoses or transformation, it's about getting off the path of Galileo's cannonball and living the experience. And now, because of Galileo, it's a classic experiment, and I learned this in high school, where you put or probably grade school, probably 7th or 8th grade sort of science, where you have a hot and a cold. You have 3 things of water: one hot, one cold, one tepid. You put or let's say lukewarm. So you put one in the hot, one in the cold, one hand in each, and then you put them both in the middle water, and you feel the difference, right? But if you take 2 thermometers and you take them out of the 2 things and put them in the middle, they go to the same level. So that was Galileo's way of proving the superiority of the objective over the subjective. But essentially, that's a form of self-deception, because if you take the numbers off the thermometers, they become a thermoscope, which is basically what Galileo was using. And if you notice it, if you put one in the hot, one in the cold, and you draw a line where they basically settle out, and then you put them into the lukewarm in the middle, exactly what happens to your hands happens to this. They basically move from their positions and find a common point. So what Goethe did is he actually showed a way of training the subjective impressions in such a way that you could think into something, into life processes. And another concept, just stop me if you want to throw something in, Richard. Basically, we look at Immanuel Kant's thing. He's another one of the philosophers of the separation between the material and the spiritual. And he had these 2 things, what he called intellectus archetypus, which was the archetype that created everything, and the intellectus ectopus, which is only what we can fragmentedly put together out of our single impressions. So according to Kant, we can never know the greater thing. And that underlies the whole philosophy of modern science. We can only put our pieces together, our hypothesis. What Goethe showed is he wrote an essay called Intuitive Judgment, where basically he showed that as his own witness, he experienced what Kant said was impossible. And that was by understanding the archetypal structure of the entire plant world, his so-called metamorphoses of plants. And and it's hard to explain this just in short time. These are things people have to go and sort of look into themselves. I can only sort of give indications of where to look and think. But there's a brilliant book that people can find online in a number of places, or it's called Man or Matter by Ernst Lehrs, Lehrs. And basically, that's on how to develop your mind in the Goethean fashion. I was turned on to that book by Trevor James Constable, the late etheric weather engineer, back about 1985, and that definitely changed my view of things along the way.
And so, if you could explain a little more on, the statements that you were opening up with, talking about, how we need a new form of thinking, and it sounded like you were implying we need new goals as well along the way. I don't know. Could you talk a little more about, I don't know, just explaining that more for people in practical terms.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. What are the goals? Some people, the goal is to get a fancy tin can that they can catapult across the galaxy at fast enough speeds to show up and maybe check out another planet in this lifetime, or maybe that's the way of expanding outwards. Mm-hmm. And that's a noble goal. I mean, I kind of think along those lines in a certain sense. But then I also look at the ancient remnants of past high civilizations around the world. And clearly, the people, well, it must have been built by aliens and this and that. I don't think you actually need to travel the universe in the body. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine, Atan Veggi, Veggi. She's a brilliant artist, Egyptologist over in Italy. And I was talking with her one day I go, what's the deal with this mummification? I don't get it. What were they doing that for? And she said, oh, it was black magic. I'm going, why? she says, well, because after the golden age, after the high age, people were no longer able to transmute their body into the golden body of light, which is underlying things like Taoist alchemy. And she said, so therefore, in order to go basically star walking, traveling among the stars, they needed their bodies preserved, or at least they believed they did. And that was what the preservation process was. Now, Atan has just recently retranslated the pyramid text from the Pyramid of Unas. Unas is not here. He went walking in the stars, right? The whole empty grave thing, which is in Christianity, far precedes that in Egypt. But it was a technology. They were out. They were traveling the stars and reporting, coming back. The universe is different than we think. If we think in purely physical terms, we're limiting ourselves to basically the physical realm. And physical realm's great, man. I love good food. I love all the senses. But it is all temporary. It's like Goethe noted in his plant studies, is that basically plants really don't continue forever. They need that discontinuity in order to continue the type. And I think underlying the plant metamorphoses, so people understand, according to Goethe, there is only one plant, and that is the vegetative surface of our planet. And they all come off of what he called the archetypal plant, this ideation. And people go, well, that's just an idea. You can't see it. But what he was pointing out, that the spirit is a higher form. The physical is just an expression of it, and it keeps on carrying on in that sense. And later research in that, just in the past probably 100 years or so, growing out of the biodynamic and anthroposophical movement, has been what's called cosmological botany, where they show that this whole plant morphology is tied into the motions of the planets as they appear from Earth, which doesn't make any sense in the Copernican worldview. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, because this even goes back, we were talking about the different worldviews. I'll look at all of them. What there is to support it, what there is to deny it. And, fundamentally, there's more than one type of space. So we have perhaps the Euclidean space, which is the carcass in a tin can. Get a catapult, fling them out like Star Trek or one of the other shows. And that's cool. I mean, I'd love to be on a trip like that. I'm not knocking that concept. But then there's the higher order one, where you can potentially travel the universe in the consciousness you have right now without having to do that. But having said that, there actually was a fusion drive developed in the early 1960s by Philo Farnsworth II, who invented the television tube. A lot of people don't know, but Farnsworth eventually invented electronic fusion. Yeah, I've noticed lately there's a meme flying around on Facebook and elsewhere about this new tokamak that they're going to get soon. They're going to get to the 10 times the temperature of the middle of the sun and get this fusion. I think, the sun's not fusion, and they don't even know it's in the middle. That's just all that mathematical guesswork, because they're still playing with Galileo's balls there. They've got to get out of that concept. The electric universe thesis shows that that's not what's happening on the sun at all. But what Farnsworth figured out, and he told his wife, Elma, who related this to me directly because I knew the Farnsworth family, and she said that Philo said because she was the first person who was ever broadcast on TV, historically, he wanted her to be the first woman to go to the stars. He was going to take her to the stars. He had figured out a fusion drive. And she's saying, well, what about this time dilation thing with relativity? He say, no, it's not like that. He says, more like quantum jumps. He said, just like in, you get the electrons in a valence shell, or they would have them in their multipactor tubes and fusor tubes. When the electron moves from one point to another, it doesn't travel in the space in between. It leaves one space and appears in the other. Basically, the leaving point and the showing up point are what we could call space scalar. So in that sense, Farnsworth believed he had figured out a way that we could get a ship above the atmosphere, tune it, and just basically you show up almost instantly at another star that you're tuned to. You can jump around and move around. because of his long patent battles with RCA, he was under the umbrella of IT&T at the time, ITT Farnsworth Labs in Indiana. And once the fusion project got going, IT&T pulled the plug, and that was the end of that. So what happened to that stuff?
Mm-hmm. And
there's
well, and
ahead.
you mentioned these. Well, with the well, I don't know. You mentioned the plants, the study of the plants, and the evidence of, like, I don't know. You referred to a chaotic outward, sort of. I'm not. It wasn't really growth. I don't know. Was it related to the ether, or I don't know. When you were mentioning the plant studies, you mentioned, as opposed, to an inward, perhaps like related to the idea of counter space, but maybe it was in our last interview, but an opposite to counter space that plants had shown an example of in the way they grow. But you mentioned, it referred to it in like a chaotic sort of way as well, but then you mentioned the planets. So I mean, I'm just still trying to get my head around exactly, how, I don't know, how what the plants showed us in those studies.
Oh, fair enough. Well, it's not so much what the plants showed, it's what one is able to intuit by watching plant cycles and changes. And of course, the mathematics of them, there's not, I threw in that quote about Goethe, about math having completely false reputation of yielding infallible results. Doesn't mean it's not useful. So yeah, that's actually a good question. And these are hard concepts to transmit without sort of meditation and grasping them. They're not sound bite. They require a change in consciousness, which doesn't mean you lose the consciousness you have now. But as Steiner took Goethe's method and showed how it could be used to create what he called new organs of cognition within consciousness. So once you understand, let's say, the metamorphoses of plants, then that becomes an organ of cognition that you can use. And let's backtrack a second. I was talking earlier about, and we were talking about the education, the imprints in the limbic system. And that's what happens through memorization, rote repeating of stuff. And that's what happens in school. So, when you think you know stuff, you don't really know it. It's been imprinted. And you're actually watching it in real time as you're characterologically responding without really, really knowing the stuff. So, how do you rise above that? And that's, by, activating the neocortex in an independent fashion so you can re-imprint that middle bit. So you no longer react to the emotive stuff, but you respond to it because that's part of your experiential reality. So in essence, if we look at space, people think of space, it just goes on forever, but counter space is an inverse space. And the way I explain this, one of the simplest ways is we look at a oscillating circuit like a Tesla coil, and the two main components are driving it. You have a coil and a capacitor, right? The coil is magnetic, it fills space, right? You can measure the field around it and stuff. You get iron filings, you can see the field, you can see the lines of force. The capacitor, that's counterspatial. It goes inside, right? So it's basically, if we look at it from that paradigm, the oscillation between a coil and a capacitor is between space and counter space. Tesla knew this. That's why he would, if you look at all Tesla's patents, most of his patents are on circuit controllers. Because he was, because he knew that these abrupt discharges into coils out of capacitors had the potential for opening up the gateways so that you could actually get energy growth out of the ethers once you got to that point. So counter space, in that sense, it's available everywhere. And we can think of it in the sense of even a pinhole camera. I'm sure you're familiar with those. You have a little tiny pinhole, and you can project through an entire picture from the other side. Now, if it was just photons squeezing through that little hole, you wouldn't be getting anything like that. But if you stop and think of it from the point of the light ether, which contains a counterspatial sort of character to it, the whole of everything surrounding it is contained in that point. Whether you want to think of that in the holographic universe theory, which has some relations in that. So counter space is an interior space. So in that sense, we look at a plant, it's rooted in the earth, it's rooted in the elements, go try to pull a tree out, that's sunk in there. But the top, it's mobile, it's rooted in the ethers, and the ethers are mobile and they're reactive to planetary motions as far as our life waves go. And there's a lot of experiments on this. Lawrence Edwards' work with changing shapes of buds as the moon gets into conjunction with different outer planets. There's a really good website people could check out. It's called budworkshops.co.uk, Lawrence Edwards' work. This stuff's absolutely fascinating. It shows this higher order working in from outside. So, and I mentioned this earlier too, Richard, I think, I can't remember all we discussed last time, but when I was mentioning William Crookes, he was looking at the borderland of the electrical phenomena and thinking he was looking for the spirit world in there, because he was also into the psychics and the seances. And I said, well, but that wasn't the border he was really looking for. That other border is this upper border of creative chaos. And that's where the life forces come from. We can call them whatever we want, the ethers, the orgone energy. None of it fits in the electromagnetic spectrum of modern scientists. But yet we experience it daily because we're alive. So there's a difference between reality and science.
And you mentioned examples in nature that go against the laws of thermodynamics. I remember from the other interview, because I actually reviewed it recently. I have an advantage over you there, but you mentioned you mentioned like the human body itself is goes against the laws of thermodynamics in ways.
Right. Well, life is anti-thermodynamic in that sense, because basically, according to thermodynamics, energy flows from high to low, like a waterfall. Pretty simple to understand. But if we look at like an orgone accumulator or a plant, the energy flows from low to high. It goes in reverse, right? So if you look at an orgone accumulator, which is basically just a capacitor, right? It's layers of, let's say, organic and inorganic materials, or basically metal and wood. You can build one out of in layers. Now that will actually, just sitting there doing nothing, will increase in temperature. And this was measured by Wilhelm Reich and was reproduced by Dr. James DeMeo, the great researcher on natural energy works up in Oregon. He's done some fantastic work in reproducing Wilhelm Reich's experiments along those lines. So, yeah, so the evidence is there for the anti-thermodynamic properties of life. It's just, was it peer reviewed?
Right.
That's the stumbling block. I run across it all the time.
And then you also mentioned last time, well, just recognizing different other forms that indicate polarization and anti-forces. As you mentioned, flames in space having ballpoint points, like that are balls rather than points. To prove this, it's like etheric evidence. I don't know. Perhaps for the listeners, you could explain that a bit more, because this etheric energy, I think, is something that definitely, like, if more people could wrap their heads around, maybe we could change more things.
Oh yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I've been looking at this etheric stuff for 30 years, and I'm just lately figuring out some of these things. It didn't come easy, but like I say, I was gullible in the right sort of way, so I followed that trail. But what you were talking about, I do remember discussing that, and that was when I was talking about the contra levitatum maxim of the Florentine academicians. well, because you weren't allowed to talk about levity. And I knew about this from Ernst Lehr's book, Man or Matter. But I often wondered, well, is there a zone above the Earth that could do it? I wasn't sure. I went, well, there is a thermosphere. I didn't know too much about it at the time. But it was when I saw the flame test on the ISS. And that I knew it instantly. I go, that's it. That's the opposite point between, things fall down, things go up. At least it's an indication of where further research could be done. That's not an absolute conclusion, but it was sort of a confirmative observation that I was thinking in the correct direction on those things. And a lot of people say, well, thermosphere, if it's so hot, how come the ISS is up there and it's not melting? And well, that's because the molecular spread is so wide that, the temperature is there within the molecules, but they're spread so far that you don't get any sort of like heat transfer in that sense. So it's a curious zone in that sense. So there's a lot of different ways of looking, and I mean, I'm not really picking on science in general. I appreciate a lot of what a lot of scientists do, and I've got some very good friends that are excellent researchers and deal with a lot of scientific matters constantly. It's the philosophy of science I disagree with that inhibits moving beyond the materialistic approach to all these things. And that's why we just get a larger sort of dialogue on those sort of matters. And I am trying to insert these ideas where I can into the dialogue when I talk to people, which is why the ones I'm still talking to remain my friends. Didn't shut me out because I couldn't give them something peer reviewed. I get those. In that sense, it's a matter of basically, instead of ether, just a substitute life energy. But the life energy seems to have 4 modifications within the terrestrial fields. And one of them, we can think of as warmth. And warmth and fire are basically connected. So warmth binds biological systems together. Fire will, so let's say, chaoticize them in a sense and releases the warmth ether, and that's why it falls up. Then we have the light ether. I mean, what does science think? Light, it's just some photons, and they're always doing this and that. Speed of light, well, they can never measure. It was actually Galileo did the first speed of light experiments. See, all this stuff comes out of Galileo. And others at the Accademia del Cimento there in Florence was, all they can ever measure is the speed of the wavefront of the group velocity. I mean, they can calculate a lot of things out of their experiments, but as the great Tesla researcher Eric Dollards pointed out, the speed of light, so-called speed of light, it isn't a limit. It's a constant for the conversion of matter to energy, but it's not a limit on the transfer. So once that wavefront's established, it could well be instant. And following along those lines, I believe that when we're looking at stars at night, we're seeing it in real time. It didn't take any dozens or hundreds or millions of years to get here. That's what it looks like right now. There is no time lags in space, just as Farnsworth pointed out with his fusor drive, if he could have gotten it going. And that fits too. So we think of the light beams as being akin to Tesla's magnetodielectric longitudinal rays, is faster than light electricity, which he proved, and we showed in experiments back in the 1980s in some of our old Borderland Lab videos.
So a lot of the, a lot of the calculations they'll try to do, they'll say like, oh, this section of the universe in this telescopic photo represents so far back in time, and that these stars existed so long ago. So you're saying that, that very well might just be a complete myth, and any calculations based on those things, if this light constant weren't such a constant as we think. I don't know, would that be a way to put it? Or
right. Well, part of that understanding that story is the work of Halton Arp, one person who's been termed the Galileo of modern science, based on the sense that Galileo stood up against the church at the time. Well, the modern church is the scientists, or scientismists, we'll call them. And Halton Arp, he was a protege of Hubble, and he started looking at disturbed galaxies and published about 1968 Arp's Catalog of Peculiar Galaxies. And he started noticing a lot of these so-called, quasars, quasi-stellar objects, which are supposedly 13 billion light years away at the very beginning of time, right after the Big Bang, and blah, blah, blah. They're actually in alignment, minor axis alignment with a lot of galaxies. I mean, certain ones, and they'd have all these different redshifts. Redshift being their way they feel that they're measuring the distance, like a Doppler effect. And there is a slight Doppler effect to that. Like if you look at the sun through a spectrograph, you can actually see a slight sort of red on the side that's moving away and a slight blue shift on the side. So there is a science behind that. However, Halton Arp was showing things like two connected galaxies that had completely different redshifts. And he tried publishing papers on that. So he was like the chief astronomer at Mount Wilson Observatory there in LA, and also on Mount Palomar. They pulled him off the telescopes because of his work. Because what he was showing is that redshifts, at least with galaxies and quasars, is not distance and time at all. It's intrinsic state. So fundamentally, galaxies go through periodic core eruptions, what we can call Seyfert events, based on Carl Seyfert's work in active galactic cores. Turns out all galaxies do that, including ours, periodically have galactic core eruptions. And it's even been posited as a potential cause of some of the past cataclysmic and age changes on our planet. What's happening here, but it appears as through some of the galactic core eruptions, is when quasars are emitted from the centers of galaxies. And that's where, so galaxies basically are born out of other galaxies. It's not expanding universe. The expansion's all based on this Doppler shift of the galaxies, but Arp's work shows it isn't. And it can't be peer reviewed because they wouldn't peer review it. So it depends on,
right,
where you want to go. I don't advocate people just believe anything, but go look at the scientific work, evaluate it against other things, and look at the logic processes that are involved in it. That's how you can sort of start discerning a new way of looking at things. So if it's not distance, and it might be for stars within the galaxy, but there's other theories within the electric universe is that different plasma states have different red shifts as well, and they can show this in the lab. So, and if the universe is electric, driving the stars from outside, which is very possible, because I've seen this stuff in the lab myself in plasmas, then we don't really know the structure of the universe. Everything needs reassessing. You got to remember, 100 years ago, people didn't even know about these other galaxies. They thought there was only one galaxy, us. That was it. We're only 100 years into that stuff.
right.
So, yeah.
And all of these different relationships we spoke of last time, like between waves, frequency, light, and color, a lot of people might not be, so aware of. But I mean, it has more implications than we realize, than most would realize. But like you say, I mean, a lot of these technologies and truths about energy forms and everything is so suppressed based on the greed of those in power. I mean, they would rather have the forms of energy that can make them the most profit, and that could be in the most limited supplies that they can control the most, and all of that sort of thing. And all of our science gets dictated along the way by these issues, right?
Sad but true.
Well, we were going to take just like a 5-minute break for some station announcements. Thomas, we'd love to keep you for the second hour. If you could just mute your microphone for just about 5 minutes.
No problem. I'm here.
All right, great. And everyone, you have been listening to Thomas Joseph Brown. We're going to be continuing into the second hour, so please do stick around. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary. And this is Truth Cat Radio, of course, at truthcatradio.com. Stick around after my show for the Stephen D. Kelly Show. It'll be coming up at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here. And, of course, we are going to be having then, our weekend break until next week. Once again, please, share and like our Facebook posts. It does help with a lot of the promotion. We generally focus on a lot through Facebook. So like our different groups, and please donate if you can to our PayPal accessible site on our support page. Stephen, are you there with us here? I'll step away for a moment if you can take over, sir.
All right, go ahead and mute your microphone. Very good. Yeah, this is Truth Cat Radio, www.truthcatradio.com, and it is Thursday, Big Thursday, June 1st, 2017. You are listening to Beyond the Matrix, and in roughly about an hour will be, oh, lovely, the Stephen D. Kelly Show. So you're going to have to hold on because I'm on the air. But anyway, that will be in 1 hour. That will be at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific time, and I'll be on. It'll be my turn. And tonight's show is going to be called Truth Cat Declares War. Opening salvo. Yes. But that's all I'm going to tell you. But yeah, we are 100% listener supported. Yeah, we do need your donations. If you guys could help us out and shut up, Grace. Go to we have a PayPal that we use. It's StephenKelly714@gmail.com, and that information is also available on our main page at www.truthcatradio.com. I noticed tonight that most of our listeners are using Mozilla or Firefox, which tells me that Explorer and what have you is not working too well. So you guys are using your Explorer, you need to you need to update your browser, whatever, switch to Firefox, because apparently Explorer doesn't want you to be listening to this network. So, hey, what can I say? But if you would like to be involved in Truth Cat Radio in any way whatsoever, please contact me directly. My name is Stephen Kelly, and my personal email is law17gun@aol.com. That's LAW17GUN@AOL.com. Do not send any money to that. There is no PayPal. The PayPal is StephenKelly714@gmail.com, and that does not have an email. So there you go. Also, if you have not done it, please join our Truth Cat Radio Facebook page and help us out by sharing our ads. Okay? And also, if you are listening to this on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up, a nice comment, and once again, share it with your friends. And that's going to do it, and we will continue with Beyond the Matrix.
Hello. And hello to everyone who is just tuning in as well. This is Beyond the Matrix. I'm your host, Richard Kary, and tonight we have Thomas Joseph Brown joining us. I'd also like to say hello to our JP and everyone at Wolf Spirit Radio, who we have a simulcast with. Hello, JP. Thanks for the simulcast. The shows here at Truth Cat Radio. We do appreciate that, and all of you listeners through Wolf Spirit Radio as well. So, yes, as I said, we have Thomas Joseph Brown with us tonight, continuing our interview. Hello, Thomas. Maybe he's still taking a moment there.
No, I'm here with you, Richard.
Okay, great. I just didn't want to rush you, give you a full chance to have a moment.
I'll have a moment after we're done talking.
Sounds good. Well, I was wondering if you could just explain a bit more about some of these alternative forms of energy. We speak of being so suppressed and everything. Now, there's the Tesla technology, and when you speak of etheric sciences, the ether, would that be the same thing as the Tesla's technology?
Well, Tesla used the term ether. That's what he said. He was drawing from the, I think at one point he called it the hydrogen ether of space. So certainly that was
All right.
fundamental to Tesla's understanding. But
and then the orgon accumulator, the organite. What about that though? Is that something different?
Yeah, well, organite and orgone accumulators are different. Well, organite was sort of a hijacked term. And they're interesting devices of various qualities. But yeah, it's not the same as the straight orgone research that Reich did. So you get these hijacked sort of concepts, and they become the main thing people know about. So you bring up the real stuff, and then they go, well, what about that? Another example is the rainbow chakras, right? People go, the traditional chakras. I go, they're not traditional. I go, yeah, those are the traditional. I go, they were invented in 1968 by Christopher Hills. They're a new age paste on.
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
You touched upon that. And you mentioned, because the green and magenta being the same frequency and different, that are under different conditions?
Spins. We can yep, exactly.
Okay.
In fact, that's essential to understanding the difference of energy for the sort of forms.
And you mentioned that before 1968, though, the chakras was you said Vedic elements. How is that spelled? Vedic.
Vedic. V-E-D-I-C. From the Vedas, the ancient Indian, which just basically means wisdom or knowledge. So they had their elemental forms, the tattvas. So the root chakra is a yellow square for Earth. It's not red. So, but that doesn't matter anymore because, like I say, Goethe said about his color theory, or about Newton's theory, he said an error in thinking will lead centuries astray. And it has. That's just one small example of it. But that pervades through everything. That's just an easy example to point out because, there's some brilliant documentaries on chakras, but I try not to watch them because I don't want to be imprinted with the wrong colors. I just want the real stuff.
So really researching pre-1968 is basically would be that the approach someone would be more likely to want to take? Would that be like a vague guideline?
It's almost impossible to find stuff on it. If you go Google search and search for chakras and go to the picture section, you've really got to look to find some that actually have the tattvas in there in their correct form. Basically, it's like less than 1% of what's out there now.
Well, so then what would they be, to your knowledge, at least, if you could just mention the different ones?
Oh, well, the core of them is basically it's a yellow square, Prithvi for Earth, which is it's the yellow of I've heard different interpretations: sand, dry clay, or gold as the essence of Earth. And then water, this Svadhisthana, is a silver crescent for water or the moon. Then the Manipura is a red triangle for fire, and Tejas. And then the heart chakra, the Anahata, is a blue sphere with 6 points, because that's just how that tattva actually acts, which shows the connection with the light ether. So there's a lot more to it. That's almost another whole discussion in itself, off the scientific line and into what I call the sort of the Bardo teachings and the approach of that, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and where that actually goes, because that's actually been one of my main interests. The scientific stuff, I just wanted to figure out material world while I was passing through it a bit, but I was always looking for the ultimate. I was always looking for the map for the next phase, which I realized when I was young was an inevitability. So if you're going through the Bardo teachings, and I've seen a couple of good documentaries on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but they never touch on the core of what I've seen in that book. And because you go through these you have the mandala, right, with the different sort of Buddhas sitting around, which are nothing more than aspects of ourselves, for our form, our input, our processing, and our output, our volition. And that's what these represent as sort of psychocosmic parts of our being. But these are the essential archetype. So modern particle physics, they talk about, when you look at something, you collapse the wave because of the double slit quantum God, so nothing's really real unless you're looking at it, and that's what causes the whole thing. But there's no projection screen in that, right? It's all this vague sort of spiritless, a vacant metaphysics, as I call it. Whereas if we look at in the Bardo teachings, they talk about the projections that you experience in the Bardo, or the after death sort of intermediate states. But what are you projecting on? There is actually the archetype for what your interface is. So what I've done, I've tried to find the anchors for that within material reality. And Goethe's theory of color was a good guide to that. So in essence, and I'll be short on this one because it's a much longer sort of dialogue. If you go through the different sectors and you don't get your realization through the teachings and the different things, always says, we'll take refuge in the rainbow heart of this Buddha. But what's the rainbow heart? That's just a translation. It's not like a rainbow. It's actually the six-pointed color circle of Goethe or Dinshaw's Spectro-chrome, which comes out of the ancient Zoroastrian. And because a lot of people don't know that the Vajrayana came from Zoroastrianism. That was a attach-on onto Buddhism, a higher form that came in from Persia. So the rainbow heart is basically the six-pointed star of the light ether, which is the center of our being. And, it can't be green because it's got to be green and magenta as it unfolds if it's the proper thing. So in that sense, so those are the fundamental sort of processes of it. There's naturally a lot more to it, but just to give the main archetypal layout.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll have to have you back for a discussion on that, by all means. But
I'm still learning it.
Yeah,
I can only pass on what I've figured out so far, and I'm not even saying I'm right on that. Everybody's got their own approach. This is what I'm comfortable with. But I was sitting, and I've been through some illness and stuff. I've been through a lot in life, and I was sitting there ill one day, and I was thinking, I'm trying to figure out, because I've had to rearrange the mandala slightly because of my understanding of it. Not much, but just to incorporate, because in the traditional sense, they use the colors of the tattvas. So the yellow sector, the second sector of the mandala, Ratnasambhava, the gift-giving jewel, is supposedly the earth element because it's yellow. And, that never made any sense to me. It wasn't until I incorporated the ethers into it that I understood that's actually the light ether, right? The wisdom of equality shining on everything. So by incorporating sort of the Vedics of the past, and I call it the etheric forms of the future, which Steiner brought through his, I was able to sort of complete the mandala, at least in a satisfactory fashion to me, where I can relate it to atmospheric color formation, structure of the body, prismatic experiments, and inner experience. So for me, it's a functional archetype from which everything can deal with. So why would I want to just meditate on a rainbow being on my body when I can figure out what's really going on? So that's why I tell people with the rainbow chakras, you have to be careful with New Age paste-ons. They might come off in the Bardo cycle. And where are you going to be then? Because that's just another projection.
Excellent. Well, this is all very, very fascinating for and I'm sure all the listeners to do more research on. And as far as these alternative forms of energy, the Tesla technology, for example, for a start. Now the premise with Nikolai Tesla's harnessing of the ether, it correct me if I'm wrong, but it would require a point on Earth where you are generating power to send it into the atmosphere, and then everything can be drawn from any point, or no, is the energy already there, and we just need something to transform it?
Well, sort of both. Well, for one thing, he wasn't broadcasting it into the air. He was converting the Earth from an electrical infinity to an electrical point. So therefore, the transmission and reception points would be what we call space scalar. But if you want to calculate it out on the globe in a mathematical sense, what's called the orthodromic line, or the what do they call that in the great circle sort of thing they use in air flights, that comes out to pi over 2 times the speed of light. But it's an Earth transmission system. And Tesla basically showed that in his work, that, the Hertzian oscillations, he called it like a rubbish heat in the ether, right? Because it fades out. You go around a mountain, your radio fades out and stuff. Whereas this stuff was going to be ambient all around the planet. And he was building his Wardenclyffe Tower basically to last 1,000 years. And he was looking to put up a backup station, I think, in South Africa, so that in case they had to take the one offline for any reason, so that basically he was looking long-term free energy for the world. And we're all going to have these little things we could put in our pocket, see and talk to anybody else anywhere on the planet for free without any. And this stuff's not electromagnetic. So if this stuff happened, we'd have a completely different sense. And this gets into the whole Goethean color spectrum as well. See, so here's what you get out of a prism. If you shine light through a prism, you don't get 7 colors out of the prism. You get 4 colors. You get a red, yellow pole and a blue, violet pole. The green appears at a distance from the prism under certain circumstances. When the 2 poles are coming together, but you pull them apart, green disappears. Put them together, green. And of course, they got these theories. Well, light rays fall upon one another in such a fashion as to cancel each other out. I go, yeah, it looks like this stuff's disappearing to me. Obviously. But you reverse those borders, and what do you get in the middle is magenta. So, and I've showed this in my talks, where basically light and electricity have inverse functions. Rudolf Steiner called electricity the fallen light ether. And I found this in my work with Eric Dollard some 30 years ago, and looking at Goethe's theory of color and his theory of Tesla's work, is that if we look at the light in the sky, we see, what's the sun? It's a yellow dot. And what's the sky? It's a blue sheet, right? So there's your longitudinal and transverse respectively, right? So the yellow side is a longitudinal instant. The transverse, the blue stuff, that's probably what takes 8 minutes to get here. Forget about the really scattering of light. But we won't go into all the details on this stuff, so we can keep to the sort of peaks and get some good info across. Now, if we look at electricity, the magnetic field space, that's reddish. The discharges are more reddish. Capacitors, it's more bluish, right? So if we bring them together, we bring the 2 poles together in a certain way, we get electromagnetism, which is what we're using now. If we bring them together as Tesla did, we get magnetodielectricity. So it's like the relationship between green and magenta. There's 2 different ways of producing this energy in the ether. So Tesla's work was his basically impulse currents were non-electromagnetic, which, when you're locked to the electromagnetic spectrum, where do you go from there? So, yeah, it's important to understand these different things. In fact, if you even look at Tesla's own writings, where he talks about the analogy of his earth wave vibration, they show a hand pump pumping up the earth. That was like Tesla's own drawings of stuff from the electrical experimenter. He was showing, this gets into projective geometry, which is where the concept of counter space comes from. So basically, the earth is a point. It becomes a single point, but clearly it's not a point. But yet that point exists in counter space everywhere where you're at, because the ether is activated. And that's what I say. It takes a while to get your mind around these things. And that's why I recommend people read books like Lairs's Man or Matter, just to sort of allow your mind to rethink some of these processes in a more logical fashion and overcome the self-deceptions such as introduced by Galileo and others in Locke along the way. Then that's where things will be transferred. Like I found, because back 20 20, 30 years ago with Borderlands, there's all these different people working on free energy. And it was fun looking at all the different equipment, saw a lot of scientific anomalies, a lot of amazing people out there working on this and knowing that this stuff's coming. But what I really felt, I like Charles Fort. Have you ever discussed Charles Fort on your radio? Are you familiar with him, Richard?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay, Charles Fort, he collected all the weird stuff that happened. It's called Fortean phenomena. Just look him up. Raining fish, that sort of stuff. Charles Fort said, it will steam engine when it's steam engine time, right? Implying that everything has its time and process. So eventually this free energy, or we can call it beneficial energy, is going to come out. It's inevitable.
Oh, wait, I think maybe you did touch on that in the first. I just forgot the name, but yeah, in various forms, consciousness will have these things arise at certain points in time. You know, these inventions or these new ways of perceiving.
Absolutely. So it's more. So it's not so much about figuring out some trick of the equipment. It's a matter of changing the underlying concept
and the overall consciousness of most of humanity. Like, you know, I mean, it'll happen, you know, on the grand scale.
At least in the minds of the inventors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but as I talked to them over the years, I've found a lot of resistance because everybody's got their theory and everybody's right. I mean, a friend of mine once, she's telling me, she goes, you know, you think you're always right. I said, well, everybody does. I said, but I am right now. That's why you're pissed off. Yeah, but that's just natural. Everybody feels they're right. But it's how do you, I mean, if somebody can show me I'm wrong, I'm very thankful because then I've learned and progressed in my understanding of things. It's not about proving you're right no matter what. So, I mean, I used to have discussions with Bruce De Palma, who former physics lecturer at MIT, and he worked with the N machine, right? The Faraday disk modifications that he had, you know, which they were producing as Paramahamsa Tiwari, the Indian scientist, has shown. You know, they're measuring it on camera, 232% efficiency. But that raises the question then. I mean, the thing can't run itself. So is over efficiency the same as over unity? Well, clearly it's not in those circumstances. So there's a lot of finer points to understand in these matters. And the same with, you know, years ago we had a industrialist in a foreign country wanted to fund some free energy research, and he had factories with big induction motors in, you know, basically making tiles and things like that. And he wanted free energy, and we're saying, yeah, we'll just put, we can just put how free do you want it? With all these induction motors here, we can just put like a bank of capacitors, just calculate it. We can slow the meter, stop it, or make it go backwards if they haven't ratcheted it, because you're not drawing power, you're using, you know, it's a power factor. And then like, you can do that? Well, it wasn't me that came up with that. I learned that in the process. It was actually Eric Dollard and his brilliance that I learned that from.
Regarding Tesla machines?
Yeah, for anything, just general transmission of electricity. If you're drawing a lot of inductive power, like through magnetic windings and stuff, you know, pumps and motors and stuff, you can basically slow your meter down, stop it by putting capacitor banks in line. Because the capacitance, which is, you know, the electric side, or we can call it the counterspatial side or whatever, that will push the power factor that the magnetics are doing, which is actually what the meter is reading. It's a power factor meter, not a energy usage. It's a bit of a con, you know, so that they can charge you. So it's just adjusted to a point where they can calculate. And I should mention too, since I mentioned the projective geometry and Tesla and the globe changing from an electrical plane to an electrical point. Mm-hmm. Charles Proteus Steinmetz, who was hired by General Electric to crack the Tesla patents, basically used what he calls synthetic geometry to crack them. And synthetic geometry and projective geometry are functionally the same thing. So there are people that have worked with this that do know about this. It's just that how do you get that into the head of somebody that's, just thinks that Einstein was the guy, and just look at anything that proves his stuff, and anything that doesn't, well, show me some peer-reviewed stuff, or I'm not even going to bother looking at it, because I need experts to confirm it.
Right.
And
Once you want to really get someone to invest a lot of money into production of these technologies, then they want to see something from the establishment's confirmation and peer review, and that's not going to happen, right?
I saw it over time. I saw literally millions of dollars thrown into stuff that I knew wasn't going to work. Meanwhile, we're like scraping along, trying to keep the doors open, trying to explain this stuff to people, right? And they're like looking at you like you're crazy. So that's the world these days. Yeah.
And then you mentioned last time vortexian energy. What would that be exactly?
Oh, well, the vortex, that's basically water power.
Okay.
In essence, when we look at like Victor Schauberger's work, the great Forstmeister of Austria, I mean, water has energy. Not even getting to the vortex, but let's just look at water itself. There's a thing called a Kelvin generator, Lord Kelvin. Basically, you have two streams of water dripping down. So the setup is you need 4 pieces of copper. So let's say 4 copper plates, or and 2 of them you put holes into, and 2 of them you sort of bend and fit them into water or a bucket or something, and the one that's in the bucket on one side is connected to the one that has a hole in it on the other side, and vice versa. So then you drip water through, the ones with the holes at the top, and you just go search for Kelvin generator, Kelvin electrostatic generator on the internet. You can find this stuff. It's real easy to find. Schauberger called the Wasserfaden, or the water thread experiment. So you basically, as this water starts dripping through this copper, it starts, the water starts coming back up towards the top, and you can put a spark gap in and it'll generate sparks. You can touch it with a fluorescent lamp and it will basically do it. And it's interesting because if you have something like a regular electrostatic generator, like a Wimshurst machine, it doesn't work so well on sort of rainy, damp days, but yet those are the days we get lightning. Well, is lightning electrostatics? Well, then how come electrostatic stuff works when it's dry better? And here you can see with the Kelvin generator is that you can basically pull electricity just out of water streams. And I experienced this when I lived in Northern California years ago. I spent about 10 years on the Mattole River in the headwaters up in Humboldt County, on Humboldt-Mendocino County line. And every year, basically around September, autumn, all leaves would fall in the river, and we had beautiful little flow forms going through, natural formations just below the house, with sort of a natural stairway going down to it. And I noticed that the first year I cleaned the thing out, and within a day or so, it was the first rain of the season. I'll go, well, that's interesting. So every year we start doing it as a thing, is go down and you just wait till it really got clogged up, and usually get a couple people over and go clean the flow forms out, so the water would start trickling them all over. And you start noticing within an hour or so, sometimes even sooner, you start feeling these amazing, like, fresh winds coming up from the sea, which was about 25 miles from where we were, through mountains. But it was flowing upstream. Remember, I was talking about the ether flows in reverse, from low to high rather than from high to low. So it's pulling back up, and it always rained within 48 hours of it. And I filmed the documentary Nature Was My Teacher, The Vision of Victor Schauberger. 1991 we put that documentary out, and a lot of the footage was actually filmed on the river below my house, on the Mattole River there, and the Eel River, which was nearby. So what we can see is there is energy in there, and Schauberger was working with basically water generators using the vortex. Now, his work was suppressed. We don't know everything about it. Unfortunately, the legend is they were even using that for some of the Nazi flying saucers, which, well, could have been. I don't know. I've heard the story. I haven't seen any physical proof of it. So you retain that stuff in suspended judgment, but you don't write it off because it wasn't peer reviewed. And I don't want to knock peer review papers, because I got friends write peer review papers, and you get some really good information out of some of that, but it's intellectually restrictive when it gets to anything outside of the paradigm. So there's different ways to approach. I mean, even our heart's a vortex, right? The center of our being, which is the light ether, in essence, as the root archetype of the Anahata chakra. There we have the vortex, which isn't pumping blood, it's being pumped by the blood. There's a lot of work on that. Can't think of the guy's name right now, but there's, again, this is all stuff can be found on, I suggest people, you got this amazing internet sitting in front of you, and what are people doing? They're like playing games and looking at silly stuff, and it's like, wow, yeah, there's amazing amounts of information out there if you know where to look.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's one way to do it. And you can make clean air. There's the flow forms. I mentioned the New Earth project earlier, the New Earth Institute, and I was a couple months ago, I was just in Bali for the New Earth Festival. And they've got this beautiful bioarchitecture center there, the Villa Akasha. And as part of that, there's a big vortex generator designed by Juan Schlosser, who's the bioarchitect there, brilliant man who I'm working with on projects. And when I was there I was actually there last December for a bit, and they had the thing running, and this giant storm came in, and it was monsoon season, so you get storms, but the lightning was like striking in the rice fields around us. The wind was excessively high. And I asked Juan, I go, I said, do you think that the vortex thing is actually helping with the rain here? And he's going, I was going to ask you that, because it's similar to Trevor Constable's weather engineering etheric translators. He said, but it's the first time we've ran it for 4 days straight. And that's the sort of storms that Trevor would get when he would first start out on his operations. The first ones would come in, a lot of lightning, heavy rains and winds, which is why orgonomists such as James DeMeo, who I mentioned earlier, didn't like Trevor's work, because he thought it was off from what Reich was doing, and the fact that he was getting lightning and the heavy winds showed that he wasn't grounded, and et cetera. Right? There's a lot of arguments going on those things. But whether or not you agree with the actual methods, what this shows is that the vortex in the geometry affects the ethers. So in that sense too, and Trevor would have basically what he would call etheric translators. So he would take a resonant plastic tube, like PVC tubing, and then they would make different lengths depending on different ratios, like inner diameter versus length, or inner circumference versus length, and then trickle water through it, point at the sky. And I've done these experiments, not for 25, 30 years, but you pretty much see cloud banks that start appearing in the sky within 15, 20 minutes of doing these things. And you can point it around, and it might only work in one direction. So you start getting a feeling of how, this stuff works, where the energies are flowing. So the vortex, it cleans water, it cleans air. It's the refreshing. That's what mountain streams do. They pull the water back up, rejuvenate it, bring it back down. That's, what our modern science, everything's based on entropy, right? It exploded once at the magical Big Bang. Scientists, they don't believe in miracles except the Big Bang. And then they don't call it a miracle. It used to be nothing. Now it exploded from quantum foam. I'm going, man, these guys, they can't even have nothing anymore. But everything's wearing down from entropy. But life is not entropic. It's syntropic. syntropic. Well, I call it centropic, towards the center, but syntropic is, some people use negentropic, but it's kind of funny. It's like anti-gravity instead of levity. I prefer to use positive terms instead of negative. So the syntropic forces are the forces of life. The entropic forces are the forces of decay. And we need both. You need life and death. You need a compost pile, to make the nutrients for the next generation. So neither one's right. You need both of them in balance and the understanding of both.
And you you mentioned working with well, at least attempting to work with Spectro-chrome machines. You mentioned the slides needed. You mentioned they had to be glass. And I don't know. Yeah, you were still in the process of researching some of that. I know with our last interview, but I mean, yeah, you mentioned 4 colors, but I think you mentioned 5, or is it 4
Yeah.
or 5?
No, this is interesting. This is 5 colors. Basically, you have red, yellow, green, blue, and violet, right? Because the green is the dominant. And we are in the physical universe. So basically, from those 5 slides, which are spectroscopically tuned, you can make 12 colors. So that 5 equals 12. That's a great mystery. And I explain this a little bit on my website, Spectro-chrome.com, if people are interested. And sure, we searched for years trying to find 5 plastic slides so we could make an easy sort of reproduction of the system. But yeah, they've got different transmission. We just couldn't do it. But nonetheless, there's well, what Dinshaw said is green and magenta are the same wavelength, but they rotate in opposite directions in the ether. And he figured that out spectroscopically. And I have worked with somebody. We've gotten a certain amount of evidence in that direction, but I'm not the primary researcher on that, so I can't really put too much out until the time comes.
Okay,
but that
fair enough.
research is all in progress. And the spectrochrome being the color healing system of Dinshaw Gadiali, which I don't treat it so much as a color healing system. To me, it represents the inner teachings of Zoroastrianism. There's something very special about that structure, and the 5 equals 12. You know, color is color. You can do it all different ways, but if you want complete understanding and connection. So I used to use the spectrochrome system not as a healing system, but as sort of an initiatory process to like imprint all 12 colors and their understanding into my being while I'm here. So when my life flashes before my eyes on the way out, whenever it is, hopefully in a few decades, the stuff's already there. I'm not like, I don't have like a rainbow overlay that I was confused by and thought was real. So that's my approach.
And well, we also talked about water and intent. I know I brought up Dr. Emoto's work, and yeah, you expanded a bit on that last time as well. But also just the concept of living water is something I think a lot of people don't appreciate the potential for. It seems like there's a lot of healing potential for that as well, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You would naturally want the most living water going through your system. And that's very hard for a lot of us. So there's a number of different people working on different vortex things around the world. So much that's going on. I can't keep up on all of it, but I understand the principles. One of the things I've been looking at lately is the flow form fountains for sort of treating water and bringing healing energies into local areas, and just doing a bit of research on that, hoping to maybe do some projects. I was inspired by the one that Juan did in Bali at the New Earth Center there, and I thought, okay, yeah, there's different ways. I've had some ideas on that, and so we're looking at Trevor Constable's weather engineering devices, which are all based on sacred geometry and water flows, and the whole syntropic sort of sense of things. So there's a lot to learn in those areas. And this is a good point you brought up too about water has memory, because I've noticed skeptics that go, well, if water has memory, then why does it remember everything? Why does it remember when it's flushed down the toilet, this and that, and that. What's with homeopathy? And homeopathic medications can lose their potency under certain things, and also water can be rejuvenated. So when you do a living water process, like through vortices, you basically erase all that old memory and you can imprint new things in it at that point. It's a renewal, a regeneration, not just a swirling. In fact, there's been tests. I'm trying to remember who did them now, but there's actually been tests showing that there's been demolecularization of toxins through vortexian action of water. It's fascinating, Reams. There's this amazing water thing coming up in, I think it's in October. This ties into the fourth Dr. Gerald Pollack up at the University of Washington State. He's the fourth phase of water. So he's the overseer of this water conference every year. I think they're doing the fourth one in Sofia, Bulgaria this year. A lot of brilliant people. Some of the real advanced research in that area is happening there. And I don't think I can make this one this year, but hopefully I can start getting up to some of these. There's some pretty amazing conferences happening around the world along those lines. So yeah, just even if you go look at just search that out, it's easy to find, this water conference 2017 Bulgaria, and just go start researching the people who are speaking there. The people that are doing the DNA imprints into water. Luc Montagnier, I can't really pronounce his name. I can't keep up on everything, Richard. There's so much of this research going on. And so I just my main research is working on the core archetypes in relation to color and light theory, and doing what I call my Galileo's cannonball project, which I want to do as a video that's actually in process, so I can show this whole path of Galileo's cannonball from his trajectory experiments to the black hole, and then show everything that was missed in between. Goethe, Steiner, Reich, Schauberger, and many more don't come to mind a second. How the living sciences were actually left out of that. So more as an overview. I leave it to people to go into these different subjects themselves. And there's only so much you can absorb in a lifetime. If you can figure out a way to take more in, let me know. I'm all for it.
Well, you certainly you're certainly a preserver of a lot of knowledge and a great inspirer, I think, for a lot of people to take on in a lot of these areas. And these people who retain this information, I think that's a very important role, as I've said before. So I mean, I would definitely wouldn't trivialize your contribution to all of that. I know last time we also talked about how and this time a bit on how technology is set up to really enslave humanity, rather than work for it. You mentioned that phrasing of it, I know, last time, and it really does seem like, as you say, a lot of these things are destined to happen. The Earth itself and just the 3D reality itself, kind of wills it into the consciousness of multiple people at certain time periods when those things arise. So I mean, you'd think it's only a matter of time before a lot more of these technologies, which are the benefit of everyone, will be more widespread in spite of the suppression. I mean, the oligarchs attempt to work against nature, but that's really a losing battle in the long run, right, for them.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, how long can you hold on to something in the material realm? I mean, look, we're seeing some of these old timers that ruined everything for the last 100 years are all starting to die off now. It's amazing they lived as long as they did, probably through practices we don't want to consider right now. But
yeah.
But as you were saying, about myself preserving this is I don't consider myself an expert on anything. I'm just an interested party. So the way I put it, I'm wandering but not lost. I'm just fascinated in this field. Anything I look at, I start seeing the connections. For example, you were talking about the technology. So we talked about Tesla and the non-electromagnetic currents. Now, he considered it the hydrogen ether and driven by the sun to a certain extent. But if we look at the sun, we look at the effects of solar cycles on flora and fauna. on wine, on disease cycles. It's absolutely incredible. The Russians have done a lot of research, because some reason or other people in the West don't like believing this stuff. But I mean, I got in front of me here graphs, dynamics of polar morbidity in Riga between 1927 and 1959, changes in solar activity and indexes of sunspot area and stuff. So you actually start looking at things like when vaccinations and stuff were brought in, and they actually, even polio, I mean, because if I got, dynamics of morbidity with polio in Japan and variety of planetary magnetic disturbance and stuff. But when they introduced these things like the polio vaccine, it was already dying out. They reintroduced it into the population. And I don't say that mildly, because my oldest sister and my brother-in-law both got mild cases of polio from the vaccine. So I can speak from that perspective and how it was reintroduced in that thing. So if the technologies, and also I think, I'm not sure if we spoke last time about Lily Kalisko's work about the crystallization of metallic salts during different planetary alignments, with gold in the sun, silver in the moon, iron in Mars, lead in Saturn. And this stuff's all very real and showable. So it means all these trace elements which are in our body in colloidal suspension are reacting directly to what the universe is doing right now, except for the fact that, Lily Kalisko, she did these things. I did a video on her working in the stars and earthly substances on my YouTube channel. She was showing all these effects, like when the moon's in front of the sun during a solar eclipse, the gold won't crystallize properly. And she started these experiments in the mid-1920s. And in 1964, she gave a talk called Gold in the Sign of the Times to anthroposophic physicians, and saying, well, because she started noticing about the mid-1950s that the gold wasn't crystallizing properly, fully anymore. She wasn't getting the beautiful forms of crystallization she was getting prior to that. And she's saying that they need to sort the cause, and they need to consider whether or not they could still use gold as a homeopathic remedy for treating heart and stuff, because apparently most of the gold in the body is in the heart in its trace element form. What I took from that is, well, what happened mid-50s was a lot of high power, roughly-ish. The high power radars coming, the mass electrification, high power radars, all sorts of stuff was coming online. The electromagnetism was basically cutting us off from the higher energies of the sun. So people think of sunlight photons, that's it. They look at the material face and the material interpretations, and don't consider the fact that life, intelligence, structure, everything that we are is pouring out of the sun at the higher levels. So therefore, how do we consider all of these things? So if Tesla had moved forward with his things, we'd have a completely different technology. We wouldn't even be using computers like this. We wouldn't be in the same frame of mind. And even culturally, if I came across a series of articles years ago, Money, Power, and Modern Art by Henry C.K. Leo, a merchant banker in New York, who usually writes on Federal Reserve, but he wrote this great 5-part series on, like I say, money, power, and modern art. And he shows how basically the robber barons and their descendants manipulated the whole art field into the non-objective arts. And well, you realize, I'm reading this, I'm going, those are the same guys that sort of suppressed all the energy stuff too. Then we can go back and look at Galileo. I mean, Galileo with the whole Accademia del Cimento and the forward, which was sponsored basically by the de Medicis, who sponsored a lot of the art. At least they sponsored good art in those days. So you basically had oligarchic sponsors for the same ones for the science and art of the eras. Very fascinating sort of approach. So in order for the technology to transform, I mean, some people think, oh, wow, Tesla batteries in our house. I'm thinking, poor Tesla, man, how misused is his name? Rather than being some advance, it's just another way for the oligarchy to control the process. So to gain the new formats of energy and stuff, you have to you have to get off the path of Galileo's cannonball, the linear spectrum.
And Well, as far as the sort of path we've taken on this planet with forms of life, well, would you say? I mean, because I found it interesting how when we were talking about the sun last time, you brought up vitamins and how the vitamins are actually carriers, if anything, and the actual vitamins are in the ethers themselves that you're actually getting. Well, ultimately from the sun, right, to the plants, to the animals, to whatever we consume.
Absolutely. That's in Rudolf Hauschka's work. The Nature of Substance is the name of that book, and also in Nutrition is one of his other books. Yeah, and he actually did experiments, yeast growing experiments, with that. I won't go into detail because it takes a while to explain all of that, but you can find the details in his book, and I've discussed that in some of my presentations. Basically, we can see the, vitamin A, the oils, they're sort of like the warmth ether. The B vitamins, are so we call the tone or chemical ether, right? The structural. And then the C, of course, is light, green plants and stuff. And then the D is the life ether, which is interesting because when he found a way of pulling that out, he found that wasn't in a spectrum. He needed a vacuum in order to filter that out to get his A vitaminosis experiments. And what do you get if you're lacking vitamin D? You get rickets. Well, rickets is like a magnesium thing in the bones. But if you don't get enough sunlight on your skin, you don't get the stuff on your bones all the way in the core. So,
hey, guys, sorry for interrupting you, but it's kind of a special occasion. I have a shout out to Montevideo, Uruguay. Okay.
Cool.
All right. Hey, I don't see that on this station too often, so I just want you there in Montevideo. Thank you for tuning in. All right, carry on.
Hey, totally cool, Stephen. Thanks for that. Now it's good to. I was just chatting with people earlier in Argentina and Bali. I was on a meeting with people around the world just prior to this one. So there's global interest in all of this. I'm very heartened to see this. And the internet's been, for as much as we can curse and condemn technology, it's wonderful. It's brought us where we're at right now. So I want to, just want to make that clear. In my critiques of, let's say, peer review and these different things, doesn't mean that stuff's all bad. There's a lot of really good papers. You have to sort through because there's a lot of just papers, and a lot of the peer review process is basically faulty and corrupt. Not just intellectually, but actually corrupt, where they're just basically doing the stuff so that they can push corporate agendas for different scientific processes and health and stuff. But there's a lot of really good scientists out there trying to figure things out and work on it. And that's what I'm saying. We just need a paradigm shift in the way that we deal with the information itself. So I'm not denying that they're getting good information. I'm just saying, well, let's look at it a different way. And like geology. Go ahead.
Oh, well, no, you mentioned last time as well. There might be a limiting due to the way we think, through the way we speak and write, and perhaps just like not using the creative side of our brain as a result of that. But there's not enough right brain thinking. There's too much left brain thinking in the way all society is progressing. Perhaps our language had something to do with that. You were even speculating on, but I mean, yeah, it's like the creative side not really explored.
Oh yeah. No, that brings up another guy who people should go look at this work. Is Dr. Leonard Shlain. His book and video, good lectures, a couple of them on YouTube. Shlain, Shlain, The Alphabet versus the Goddess. Right? And what's interesting about that is, right, wherever there's a linear script, there seems to be misogynistic, dominant male sort of stuff overriding all through culture. But let's just take a thing. What was happening like when Galileo and all this stuff, the Renaissance, all this flourishing of science, what was happening? The witch hunts. Right? I mean, how dumb can you be when you're trying to be smart? rather than like honoring the wisdom of, the wise women of the communities and stuff, they hunted them down and killed them, tortured them. That's during the Renaissance, all the way into the beginning of, and this is because of the left brain linear script. Thank you for bringing that up, Richard. It's a very important thesis, and I do recommend people go and find Leonard Schlehn's works. He's passed away now, so you can't get him on to talk about it, but I'm including his work in my Galileo's Cannonball stuff, because that is a critical piece of the puzzle.
Oh, okay, great. All right, well, yeah, I don't know. I guess we only have a couple minutes left here. Then, I don't know if there's, if you wanted to mention, I have links, that'll be up with the archives and that. But if you want to mention the best way people can get in touch with you and your work, feel free to, spend the last couple minutes with that sort of.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've got sort of a Facebook page I post my research on. I haven't been on there too much. If they search my name, Thomas Joseph Brown, I don't accept too many friend things just because I can't keep up on that. But I do. There's also a Thomas Joseph Brown page, which is my research page, and it's facebook.com/eclectication. I thought eclectic. So I like eclectication, right? It's like just, I don't know where I came up with that word, but I just sort of education and eclectic stuff. So that's one way. I've got a YouTube channel. I haven't produced anything in about a year, but there's stuff on there going back into the 1980s, like our old Tesla experiments and 90s documentaries. And that's and also suggest people have a look at the New Earth.Institute webpage. There's also a lot of real interesting resources in there, far beyond even what I'm talking about here. Everything from birth and dying, creative arts, bioarchitecture, et cetera, et cetera. There's there's so much to talk about. I don't know. It's just been a fun conversation, Richard. But I'll throw it in before I'm done. The one thing I miss about Chicago is the music scene. God, that was great. I used to live down the street from the Jazz Showcase and hang out at the blues bars. What a lovely life it was in Chicago, but I haven't lived there in, almost 40 years. So
Okay.
I'll come visit sometime.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm a little younger than you. I'm about like 2/3 your age. I'm about 40 right now. But I actually studied music at UIC. I got a Bachelor of Arts there in music theory and composition. And I have always appreciated the music scene locally here. I should appreciate it more while I'm still here. Definitely.
Yeah. It's world class, especially the jazz stuff. It's like, wow. Used to see all the greats down there at the Jazz Showcase for like cover charge and 2-drink minimum. Rahsaan Roland Kirk and Sun Ra and you name them. But yeah, it's probably much more expensive these days. I don't get out much, and they don't do that here. But anyway,
All right.
Richard, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you, and I'm happy to continue on sometime again.
Yeah, I do appreciate it, and yeah, definitely we'll have you back again. We'd love that. I'm sure all the listeners would agree. So yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Cool. All right. You have a good rest of the evening there, which it must be.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and you have a great day.
Thank you.
All right. And everyone out there, Truth Cat Radio listeners, thank you for listening, and thank you to JP and everyone there at Wolf Spirit Radio as well. This has been Beyond the Matrix with Richard Kary, and you are listening to Thomas Joseph Brown. This past show. Stick around. Stephen D. Kelly is going to be coming up with the Stephen D. Kelly Show in just over 5 minutes or so here. It's the top of the hour. And we are going to be having like a bit
You'll
of
be putting the recordings up after the show in about 24 hours. Is that what you wanted to say?
Oh, well, yeah. We generally have all the recordings on our Truth Cat Radio YouTube for everyone. So yeah, just feel free to do a search on YouTube for Truth Cat Radio. You'll have no problem.
I got a better idea. Go to Truth Cat Radio Facebook page and get it from there. Okay.
Oh yeah, that is true.
Join the
do
Truth
have
Cat
all
Radio
the
Facebook
recent
page,
ones.
and you'll see it there first.
Great idea, Stephen. Actually, yeah, that would be the easiest for the most recent and all the information we have for the station updates. Well, no, thank you everyone who has been listening. We will see you again next week. I know next week we have a very exciting guest as well. Michael Rivero is going to be coming back to the station, updating us on a lot of information. Always love to have him on as a guest. But yeah, do stick around for Stephen D. Kelly's show. And until next time, transcend the construct. Regards.